$100 for any advance at $1,600.
My name is Nigel Freeman. I'm director of the African American Fine Art Department at Swann Galleries. And on February 17th, we're having an auction of African American fine art. 169 lots of exceptional works by African American artists over the entire 20th century. It will include works from early artists like Henry Sawatana to contemporary artists working today like Kara Walker. In the beginning of the catalog, we're very lucky to have two very fine paintings by really the grandfather of modern African American art, Henry Sawatana. He was an expatriate artist. He moved to Paris after studying with Thomas Eakins at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art. These two paintings we have by Tanner show typical subject matter for him, what he's known for, which are his treatment of biblical subjects. He was very interested in stories of the Holy Land, set in the Holy Land. The Annunciation, the angel appearing to the shepherds, is a typical biblical scene, and he actually traveled to the Holy Land later in his life to revisit the actual locations of many of these paintings. We also have an early Chicago artist, a very scarce painting by an artist whose work has not come to auction before, James Bolivar Needham. Now, Needham is not a well-known artist. Unlike Tanner, he wasn't included in the salons or academies of the time in Paris or in the United States. He worked quietly in Chicago on the Docklands, and it's only recently that his paintings have been rediscovered. But he did show a few of his works in his lifetime, and we're lucky to have a painting that was shown in his lifetime in this sale. A scarce large view of the docks. His paintings are hard to find. They're usually very small, as he painted them on the spot. They're usually not signed, as this one is, and this one also has an exhibition label on the back. In the history that we have of this artist, there's only one known exhibition for him, so this is an unusual and large example of an early African American artist working in Chicago. The first real movement of African American fine art in the United States was in the Harlem Renaissance, and we have several works by important artists working in that time. We have photographs by James Van Der Zee, the best-known early African-American photographer and really the artist who really documented the whole Harlem experience that we know today. And other works, sculpture by Meadowville Warwick Fuller, and a linoleum cut by James Lesesne Wells. Another female artist who started in the Harlem Renaissance and really epitomized the early 20th century work of African Americans in sculpture is Augusta Savage. And I'd like to talk briefly about a collection that has a sculpture of hers that we're offering in this sale. This piece, lot 15, Augusta Savage's head, which we don't know the title, but we believe it's either a head of a Martinique woman or a Martiniquaise, corresponds to a list of works that we found. But this sculpture actually belonged to a colleague of hers in the WPA. Augusta Savage's most famous piece is Gamin, a small head of an African-American young boy. This piece is similar, and Gamin and other works were owned by this collector. The collector is Sarah West. She was a colleague of Augusta Savage in the WPA. We're lucky to have a photograph of Sarah West in her home with one of the artworks. Lot 15 is actually pictured in this photograph of the artist sitting on a couch, and you can see other works by Augusta Savage in the picture. Sarah West obviously was close to Augusta Savage, owning 3 fine sculptures by Augusta Savage in her collection. Also in the sale is lot 16, Norman Lewis, construction workers / rural landscape, that was also owned by Sarah West. Sarah West also knew Norman Lewis. They were friends and both teachers at the Harlem Community Art Center. And this is a great early watercolor of the WPA. It's double-sided. Both sides are painted on. Artists didn't have much money for paper, and this is not that unusual, but it's great to have an early Norman Lewis watercolor from the 1940s. And it's also great to see a painting that shows two areas of interest for the artist. On one side we have a typical WPA scene, construction workers building, something that you would expect to see in the streets of New York. And on the other side is a rather desolate rural landscape where Norman Lewis traveled in 1937 briefly in South Carolina, and he's revisiting that in this later watercolor dated 1943. At the same time in Chicago, there was another important center of learning sponsored by the WPA, the Southside Community Art Center, and one of the important African-American artists to come out of Chicago at the time is El Desir Couture. Lot 29, El Desir Couture's African Women, pen and ink on paper, a drawing of two nudes, is a wonderful and scarce example of this early figurative artist. Couture was actually a high school classmate, a fellow future artist Charles White and Charles Seabury. El Desir Couture is famous for his depictions of African-American beauty, really one of the first African-American modern artists to focus on African-American women and elevate their beauty in fine art, and this is a wonderful example of his drawing. And this is only the second drawing of El Desir Couture to come to auction. This drawing was actually exhibited at the Art Institute of Chicago later in the 1940s, and it has the original label on the back of the frame. Lot 30 is one of the first works we have of Charles White in this auction, one of a number of works by Charles White. And this is a fantastic find. We're very excited to offer the first significant painting by Charles White at auction. Charles White's Hope Imprisoned is a tempera painting on paper, dated and signed 1946. Although Charles White was a mural painter, he really focused on the graphic arts, so it's very rare and very exciting to have an actual painting by Charles White here in our auction. Hope Imprisoned really encapsulates the struggles of many African-American women, and this is a subject that Charles White painted throughout the 1940s, showing the struggles of the pre-civil rights era. Two other highlights in the auction are works by Buford Delaney, lots 41, Untitled work of Washington Square Park, and lot 42, New Dimensions or Distant Horizons, both early paintings by an important artist who was working in New York in the early 1950s. Buford Delaney went on to move to Paris and is known for his abstract paintings during his expatriate days, but these are wonderful, very scarce New York scenes by this modern painter. Buford Delaney really incorporated ideas of modernism. He was a friend of Stuart Davis. He studied at the Art Students League in the 1950s with artists like Jackson Pollock and Charles Alston. And he really, in these works, reinterprets New York into a more colorful, idyllic place. Part of the provenance and an interesting story around lot 42 is how this work was obtained by the owner. In 1950s, Buford Delaney was preparing to move to Paris, and this painting was actually offered as a door prize at a fundraiser to raise money for the artist's trip to Paris. And so raffle tickets were sold, and the owner, Carl Leeds, was the lucky winner and has owned this painting since. This painting was later shown in a recent retrospective at the Philadelphia Museum and the Minneapolis Institute of Fine Arts.